Okay. All right, so actually first, so I've got about like a 10-minute slide deck, but after that we're going to be doing some work with a sandbox environment that uses VirtualBox Vagrant. So I've got some USB keys here that have the sandbox on them and a Vagrant file. So if you guys want to just pass these around, distribute them, load that up if you're going to be using it after the small presentation. So I don't know. All right, so my name's Sean Porter. I work at Heavy Water Operations, like an automation metrics consulting company based out of Portland, Oregon. I'm actually from Vancouver, Canada, so no woos. Sensu is a monitoring framework that I was lucky enough to create when I worked at a company called Sonian, which is actually a local company in Boston. And they're nice enough to let me open source it and taking it with me. Okay, so first of all, what is it? So Sensu is an open source monitoring framework that aims to be simple, malleable, and scalable. So what does this mean? So basically, I believe that, for a monitoring system to truly work fit for an organization, you really have to compose it to fit your own unique requirements. So Sensu it's a framework to allow ops or developers to basically craft a system that makes sense to you. So basically, don't tie yourself to a single monolithic piece of software or service, SaaS. There's no reason why you should just be tied into one. So transformers are awesome. And individually, these components are sweet. They do their job really well. So the idea of Sensu is to combine them into one unstoppable force. Yes, thanks, Hasbro. Okay, so what are we going to do today? So we're going to first just learn a little bit about Sensu, basically cover everything from basic architecture to some simple configuration. And we're going to use that sandbox environment to basically carry out any sort of experiments that you want to try today. And then possibly at the end we could share if anybody did anything crazy or wired it up in their own real environment. Or you can test it in production. Okay, so I basically just listed all this. So the idea is that after this short presentation, I'm going to walk around and help you guys experiment. I can provide more information. The documentation is currently a bit lacking, so I'm walking documentation, so abuse me while I'm here. All right, so let's do this. All right, so how does it work? More importantly, what does it do? So the idea behind Sensu is fairly simple. Those familiar with Nagios, it's the same sort of model in that you execute checks on your infrastructure that produce results. Those results are then processed, and then depending on certain conditions, those can be translated to events which get handled by an event handler. So the check spec is really similar. So this is the one aspect of Nagios that I actually liked was the ability to just script a check that outputs data, so semi-structured. You can even output JSON, any sort of serialization, and to standard out, standard error, and then use exit status to indicate severity. So all Nagios checks work with Sensu, as Nagios was used at Sonian before I wrote this thing, so it made the migration really easy. Handlers. So basically, an event handler is just something that takes action on that event data. So Sensu has several types. You can execute a script. Basically, the event data gets passed to the script via standard input, and then you can do whatever. This one's the most powerful handler since you can talk to any sort of other service. You can send an email if you like. Talk to messages. You can open a socket, TCP, UDP, shove data in, AMQP, and then there's sets, which are basically, you can define collections of handlers, so an event can go to multiple at a time. So that's pretty awesome. So the main concept behind Sensu is that you want to execute a check on a collection of clients. So what this means is the clients have an agent running on them that basically has a defined set of subscriptions. This just details the responsibility of the box. So a load balancer might have load balancer, HA proxy, various services running on it. Web server box might have, Apache, that sort of thing. So these are targets that the collection includes. So they'll look like this. So a check will target the load balancer, the application, and the API. So this check might be as simple as a check HTTP. And so if you did a check request for this check, it would fan out to n number of clients. So this is better, more efficient than the Nagios approach of, one-to-one polling. And it's more capable of dealing with shitty latency on public clouds. So alternatively, you can use what's called check standalone mode, which basically means that the check is executed on the client, and it's a strictly push model. The downside is there's no check execution orchestration, so you can't do things like aggregates, no sort of pooling, or orchestrated metric collection. Another thing is the client has a locally bound socket, which basically is for external input. So a lot of apps tend to add some instrumentation, enabling applications to generate events or dump metrics to the socket and use it as a common bus. So it's actually in a JSON format. The only requirements is that the JSON includes a name and an output. Status will default to 0. And you can just add any sort of nested attributes to this JSON, and that gets included in the event data. So every check result is inspected. So these are these conditions that I mentioned earlier that decide whether it gets turned into an event. So usually, just like Nagios, a non-zero exit status will indicate severity of warning, critical, or unknown. That usually translates to event. It could be the first zero exit status in a series. This would indicate a resolution. Or it could be marked as a metric, so it always translates to event, gets pumped through to some sort of endpoint like graphite. So event data, what does it look like? So this is just an example. I've stripped out the quotations around the keys just to clean it up a little bit. So actually, you can see my mouse. Yeah, there we go. Poor man's laser pointer. So this is some client data. So basically, every client has some information about it, and you can just add custom things. This is the bare minimum that Sensu expects. So this client only subscribes to application. So any sort of check that includes application in the collection, that's what will execute it. Then there's some check space. So this is just an example that check HTTP ran. It hit this URL, got a 503. This runs every 60 seconds. So here's some history. Sensu has some flap detection built in. When the check was issued and when it was actually executed, and then the number of occurrences of this. So if this event keeps on happening, basically it just increments that occurrence counter and updates any values that changed. Okay, so what can we do with it? So you can either write a handler that sends an email or wire it into various services. So there's no reason why Sensu can't talk to multiple at a time. So Sensu currently really cares about the current state of things, so you might want to have, use PagerDuty for notifications, but then dump events to Papertrail, Logly, Logstash, Graylog2 as your event history, which is really cool because you can search and then you can use those logs to actually draw graphs and all sorts of crazy shit. Yeah, so you can do a lot more than send an email, and I seriously recommend it. Okay, so quick architecture overview. So Sensu uses RabbitMQ as the message layer. RabbitMQ just gets you some quick wins in that it has SSL support, real authentication, vhost. It's written in Erlang. It's quite a good piece of software in my opinion. MQP can be a bit of a pain, but as a Sensu user, you don't interact with AMQP directly, so it's all right. Redis is used to store current data about your environment, so current events, the client registry. So those are the two service dependencies. So there's two main back-end services. So there's the Sensu server, which you can run one or more of, so it scales out horizontally. This is nice, so as you increase the size of your infrastructure, you can increase the size of your event processing. You're not tied to creating some sort of weird tiered system with propagation. So that's nice. There's an API which provides a RESTful-ish interface to rip out data, to build dashboards, write tools, CLI stuff. So the client's is interesting in that it runs on all your boxes. When it first starts up, it sends a keep alive, and that's what registers it in the Sensu registry. So there's no define your infrastructure in a config file and then restart Nagios. With Sensu, it just happens when boxes come up. Okay, so configuration. Okay, so the configuration uses one or more JSON files with deep merging. So this is designed with configuration management in mind. It's really easy to drive with something like Puppet or Chef, CF Engine, Juju, whatever. This is much nicer than, much easier because it's human readable, but machines can read it and parse it and pass it along, no problem. So check definition, what does it look like? So this is a bare minimum check definition. So basically, it's going to execute that command on any client that has the bar subscription, and it's going to do it every 30 seconds. So there's a few other things you can add to it. So this one's running every 30 seconds. And so you can just add, so you can specify your handlers that the check events are going to map to. You can also just include any sort of custom nested attributes, and that's made available in your event data. So if you, for instance, wrote a pipe handler that can, you can include maybe even escalation policy for that specific check, and your handler can use that. Or check ownership, so you can do a little bit of notification routing, like this one's owned by the website team or whatever. So you can just add custom attributes there. You can also do some metric collection with Sensu. This one runs every 10 seconds. It just dumps 42. And then here's an example of a standalone check. So instead of specifying subscribers, you say standalone true, and that will schedule it on the client wherever this config file is dropped. So the handler definition. So as I mentioned before, the pipe handler gets that event data, that JSON that we saw earlier, via standard input. So if it parses it, it can do whatever. In this case, you're just sending an email with that JSON data as the body, subject sensu to foo@bar.ca. But more powerful ones run a Ruby script or Python, whatever you want, that read that JSON data and then do things. So the most commonly used one is PagerDuty, because it's awesome for any sort of rotations and escalations. So here's a TCP example. So this one basically, it's going to connect, so when it receives an event, it's going to connect to the socket. So this is interesting here. I've just made a note, is that Sensu not only has checks and handlers, they also have filters and mutators. So you're able to filter events out or mutate event data. So in this case, we only want the check output and ship that to Graphite. Here's one for Graylog2 with UDP. Basically, it's taking the event data and then gelfifying it. It's a word. Basically, just I think it's just gzipping it, sticking it in Graylog2. Here's an AMQP one. So sending Sensu events over AMQP for consumption. I haven't tested this one actually, and I have no idea if it'll work, but this is one for just sticking into Logstash. and here's a set. So if you're in your check definition, if you said, you know, oh, this is just the default handler, so that in this case, any event that doesn't have a check that specifies its handler, it'll go to the PagerDuty and Logstash as it's the default handler. So this is just a small portion of the actual configuration for Sensu. There's various other parts and bits that you can use and utilize, but I'm not going to cover it just because it's boring going through JSON snippets and slides. So the idea is that you can port your Nagios stuff, and then you can build out your own custom monitoring router, tying together these great services, composing a system. So I don't know, where did the USB keys get to? How far back? Okay. And who has a copy already? Okay, that's pretty good. So what is it? It's a VirtualBox image, or Vagrant-based box to be specific. It's running the Sensu components. It's got a few examples. Basically, I built this just with my Monitor cookbook. There's a few checks in there that are collecting metrics and checking RabbitMQ and Redis. It's basically just a base so that you can get an idea of what configuration looks like, and you can just have at it. If you screw it up, blow away the box and use the base box to fire up a new one. So it's easy to deal with. So if you don't have the USB key, I should put this at the beginning. You can download the box directly from this URL. So I don't know. Our Wi-Fi is kind of spotty, so I don't know. I'll put that up at the very end. So some challenges to try. So there's some checks in place, but I definitely would love to see people installing other services, like install Graphite on it and then wire things up. Maybe try out the latest version of Flapjack and try some experiments with that and notifications. Wire it up to your current notification mechanisms. Like if at work you're using PagerDuty, try a PagerDuty handler. On GitHub, there's a Sensu org. Check that out. There's lots of community plugins. Grab those, pull them in. Check out filters and mutators. It's interesting to see that you can collect you can even take Nagios perf data and then send that to Graphite, send it to Librato, multiple backends at once. It's interesting. So you can find me on Twitter at PorterTech. IRC as well, PorterTech in the Sensu channel. You can get me at heavywatorops.com and check us out. So there's the download link. I'm just going to be walking around for the rest of the time, just in this room. So if you want to just hack while you're in here, that's cool. If not, you can go around there and just ping me on the Sensu IRC channel, and I might come and find you.
I've seen Sensu sort of build as an alternative to CollectD. Can you pipe data from CollectD into Sensu? It doesn't seem like they need to. It seems like that can be super usable.
So CollectD scripts are a little bit different because I haven't really seen any integration there, like reusing CollectD plugins. A lot of people have just basically written specific plugins for metric collection for various services. At Heavy Water, we actually use CollectD for high resolution metric collection just because the overload through RabbitMQ in some cases doesn't make sense. Whereas in some other cases, it does. Like whenever actually collecting those metrics requires hitting an API, it might be better to do it through Sensu. Actually, are there any other questions? Yeah.
So I'm curious what problem Sensu is trying to solve. You make a lot of comparisons to Nagios and those two sets, porting and configuration. Is it a drop-in replacement for Nagios?
At Sonian, the whole intention was to replace Nagios with it. So get remote check execution and event handling, and just replace Nagios with that, because that's really all we wanted, and then we wanted to be able to wire it up to various other services. So it's intended to be, a traditional like Xenos or Nagios replacement. but designed to make you be able to compose it. It's supposed to be the primitives that you build upon. So the problems it's trying to solve is primarily with dynamic infrastructure. So when clients are coming up and down quickly, it just didn't work with Nagios since you had to define your infrastructure in your config file. So you're restarting Nagios every 10 minutes, which was dreadful with any sort of scheduling of check execution. And it's using a message bus, so it makes it possible to ship data around to anything with AMQP support. Yeah.
Would you be able to show the updated dashboard?
Sure. Actually, I have it running. I don't want this. Yeah. I'll just gonna do this. Actually, I haven't hit it yet, so this might not work. Admin secret. Okay, so there's no current. So this is the dashboard. This is the new one in that sandbox. So this is actually just being released. It's going to become stable today. So you're actually all installing a beta version. So you're my last layer of testing before I make it stable. So thank you all. So this is the dashboard. So basically, if you look at the landing page, basically shows events. So Sensu takes the approach in that looking at a green dashboard makes absolutely no fucking sense. It doesn't scale. You have 1,000 clients. It's pretty much impossible to look at check output for 1,000 clients. Like, you're going to be infinitely scrolling to see that many. So Sensu really just wants to display what's wrong, what's broken. The API has functionality to see what clients are running what checks in the last successful execution, so you can get a sense of a guarantee there. So you could definitely build your own dashboard where, you could do a visualization where you show green blocks to represent successfully running checks, and then you could use color coding to indicate any sort of failure. But Sensu itself, actually, hold on, I'm going to create a I'm going to create an event so we have something to look at. Put test status 2. So responded okay. Just see if this refreshes. There you go. So the dashboard actually uses Backbone.js and does some aggressive polling, and it looks at the collections and then does different models. So actually, if you click on this event and you have it open and the model gets updated, it'll actually refresh the data in this dialog. So it's pretty cool. I'm happy. The original dashboard hadn't changed in over a year, so this is a nice refresh. So you can do things like silence the client, silence the check. You can resolve the event. Let's just click around. There you go. So I resolved it. You can look at things like your client data. So any sort of custom attributes will actually display here. So here we can see the subscriptions, the address, and then if we added anything else, it'll show. You can see some checks defined. Stashes are basically a JSON key value store on the API, so you can just dump JSON to this and create a stash, and you can access stashes from within your handlers, so you can hold some sort of logic in there, some state. It's just an interesting feature, so, and you can see some information. So here you can see that there's keep lives and result queue, there are consumers, and there's no backlog. So this page is just used to check on Sensu health. Actually, I'll show registration. So if I delete this client, so I just deleted the client, it'll self-register. The time might be long. So yeah, this is just a nice refresh. It's lightweight. It's just the one that ships with the Sensu app package. Sensu uses an omnibus style package, so, oh, there it is. So the client came back automatically, so that just shows self-registration. So if you delete it, it automatically refreshes its data. Is that good enough for a dashboard demo?
Not related to the dashboard, but what's the minimum thing that has to go onto a client for it to?
Client, let's see here. That, if you can read that, actually here. So that tells it about the client, and then some connection information. So I'll talk really loud, but basically right now in the sandbox, it's using RabbitMQ SSL. It's got some generated certs, some credentials. This isn't actually needed for the client, nor this. So all you need is that RabbitMQ block and that client block. So that's all you need on your clients. It's super easy to populate that data with things like Puppet and Factor, Chef and OHI, and different attributes. So yeah, that's your minimum config.
All right, so I've never worked with Audio, so I've heard how horrible it is. The checks that are defined, looks like some of the reference shell scripts.
Yes.
So those need to exist on the clients that are checking in, right?
No, they don't.
They don't.
No. So the original model of Sensu did require local definitions. So so if you're doing the regular pub sub, so you specify those subscriptions, the command, the check name, and the time issued goes over the AMQP exchange. Clients execute it and pop those results onto the queue. You can run your clients in safe mode, which basically says only run checks that are locally defined, just if you have an issue with, potential security threats. Yeah, but for those checks in order to properly execute on the client, they do have to have the dependencies.
And you have to put the checks on each client?
If the check actually uses a plugin like Check HTTP, that has to be there. Sensu doesn't take care of, Sensu's not re-implementing configuration management. Yes?
Can you show an example of a subscription file?
Oh, okay, so that was actually in, this one's just subscribed to all. So basically, like your client will include a subscriptions array. This just says those are the responsibilities. All is just one tag to all of your boxes, so you can fan out them all. If this was a web server, you'd add web server or GraphIDO MySQL. Then in the check definition, let's see if I got one. So notice I'm using like the Chef Cookbook does like a nested directory way of doing configuration files. So this one's just how the Chef Cookbook does it. Because Sensu will read from a directory, walk all the way through, and then deep merge all the snippets. So here you go, and then the check basically has a subscribers area, and this is going to target all. So this could also potentially target anything with all, or web server, or agent proxy. So that's that light coupling between things. So that's how you get a check to execute on a group of clients. Do the clients know what they do? So. Any other questions? Cool. All right. So let me know if you have any problems with the sandbox. You might have to do vagrant box add and then provide the box off the USB key. Anybody having troubles with it? Yes. Yes? Oh, really? Okay. Sean, you should be able to just point it, vagrant box add, and then provide the.
You have to say the box. So you have to name it sandbox.
Oh, okay. So vagrant box add sandbox, and then the path to the box file. Okay.
You also just unzip the box and just import it in virtual box.
Right. You can just import the box.
What's the default password?
Sorry?
What's the default password? Secret.
Secret? Is it
And then do we have to do anything to, once the Vagrant's box is up and running, should it have launch Sensu?
It should do some port, the sandbox will actually port forward 8080 to your local box and 4567, which is the API. So you should be able to view that stuff on your local box, and then you can get in with SSH and see all the running services. It should be running the full stack and the examples. I think currently it's just got, why can't I type? Handlers. So there's a example handler for PagerDuty. There's a bunch defined there that you can use. I think by default it's just using the internal debug handler, so it's any event's just going to output to var log Sensu server. Cool. Yep.
Are there any patterns for handling checks to a specific site to a particular client?
So do you want different behavior depending on the client, or?
Yeah, and like, so there's probably like a broad range of checks that I want to apply to all of my clients. Like
Yeah.
checks whether like with Linux or Windows or whatever. But then perhaps for some instances, I want to have some very custom checks, and maybe it's like really particular custom.
So I mentioned there's other models other than the pub sub model. There's also the standalone. So I'd actually, in that case, I would probably just drop a standalone definition on those unique snowflakes and then just use the push model. Because then you're not having to do any sort of, have extra subscriptions just for those unique clients and whatnot. Does that make sense? Okay. Also, anyone here currently using Sensu? Nice. Okay. So that half the room's cool. Oh, and I want those USB keys back, by the way. Yeah. They're from like the local grocery store. So I was getting ready to go and using Sensu? So I need more usage metrics, like Kyle of Riemann suggested. It'd probably be a good idea to know how many people are using it. Judging by the size of the IRC channel, there's about 120 people hang out in the IRC. There's some fairly large deployments. We're around 3,000 to 4,000 nodes, and using a small Sensu installation. It's I think, Paperless Post is using it. Sonian's still using it. I think Pinterest is rolling it out, and there's a good healthy community of really passionate people, and it's great to see people of all different skill sets and capabilities pushing stuff, from check plugins to working on the core and everything. So I'm really happy with how the community's grown.
So it looks like once you create a virtual node of a Vagrant, you still have to plug a Vagrant, right, to create your Vagrant file.
There should have been a Vagrant file on the USB drive in the folder. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so it's you can go Vagrant init and then change the box name and then just go Vagrant up.
But you need forward port.
Yeah, you can add the VM forward port. You don't have to. It's just. Yeah, that's right. Or you can use SSH port forwarding. Cool. All right, so I'm actually just gonna walk around a bit. You guys can, it's pretty much as in depth as I wanted. This is actually longer than I wanted to be up here for, so I'm gonna just walk around and try and help you guys. Put up your hand or yell at me, track me down, and I should be able to give you a hand. That's it. Oh.